Kalimat. I'll be hosting this Freedom Conversations. It's really a convergence of three different organizational efforts. The Illinois Freedom Corridor here in Illinois, the Illinois Network to Freedom, which is a statewide organizing effort, and of course the New Philadelphia Association, working with New Philadelphia, the abolitionist town that joined the national park in 2022. We have this as a monthly lecture series. So please, and when you registered, or if you just go to Illinois Conversations, Freedom Conversations, you'll see the previous events and the coming events. All the previous events have been videoed and are online, so you'll have an opportunity to visit that conversation if you missed it when it actually happened. Tonight, we're so pleased to have Professor Tim Messer-Kruse, a historian and professor of ethnic studies at Bowling Green State University in Ohio. He's going to be talking about his book, The Patriots Dilemma: White Abolitionism and Black Banishment in the Founding of the United States of America. This would be a deep dive into the abolitionist movement. We have an hour or so, so Tim's going to talk, and then please use the chat to raise any questions or commentary as it goes along, and we'll try to get you in the conversation after he finishes. So, my dear friend and colleague, Tim, take it away.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Abdul. Thank you, Kate, for inviting me. As I was saying before the hour struck, it's some really impressive company that I'm keeping here with the rest of the lecturers in this series. And so I'm very pleased and proud to be part of it. So thank you again. So I want to talk about my book, The Patriots Dilemma, which is yet another in a long line of projects that I think I've come to realize all share one characteristic, even though they're on vastly different historical topics and themes. The one characteristic they all share is that they are fundamentally contrarian. They begin from a deep skepticism of existing conventional understandings of the past, and they proceed from that point. In this case, in this book, I'm taking a contrarian view and contrarian interpretation of some of the most highly renowned activists of the 18th century. Individuals who have been widely praised and recognized as leading the fight against one of the worst human stains in history, and that would be American chattel slavery. The problem that I see in the way that we remember and regard the individuals who led this movement is that we may be a bit too eager to understand them in a framework which is our own modern framework. And also, I think we have a very deep tendency to want to understand things through the trope of a story, through the structure of story. And stories demand that there be heroes and there be villains, that there be conflict and there be resolution. And the real world oftentimes doesn't have any of those things. It has a lot of individuals who occupy some point in a spectrum between what we call villainy and morality, or what we call conflict and resolution. It's a very messy picture when we really dig down into the details. And that's the story that I wanted to pursue here. I think it might help for me to talk about the timing of when I undertook this project, because I think it says something about the project itself. I first became interested in 18th century abolitionism with the very famous publication in 2019 of the 1619 Project by the New York Times Magazine. Um, I was I was familiar with a lot of the historical information that was being presented. And in fact, I have to admit that when I first read the 1619 Project, um, I was uh, I was impressed at its scope, but I didn't feel like anything there was particularly novel. I think those of us who have read into this history found most of that information rather familiar. As a result of that, I was stunned, completely floored when it provoked the national reaction that it did. It was an eye opener to see the ferocity of the backlash against this reinterpretation of America's founding. And I was particularly disappointed to see some of the most prominent historians uh, writing letters to the editor denouncing that project and labeling it a misinterpretation of the past. And that, in many ways, that sort of fired my resolve to be even more contrarian if I could. So, 2019, as you all know, was on the doorstep of one of the worst years in modern memory, our lockdown year, which followed. And of course, I don't want to recount what was really a very anxious and terrible time for all of us, I think, traumatizing in many ways. But I do have to embarrassingly admit that for some of us scholars, it was a real opportunity. And the opportunity I have to recount is that for that period of time when we were in lockdown, almost all of the commercial databases, archives, and libraries around the world withdrew their paywalls and opened up their collections to anybody who cared to browse them. And it was a unique opportunity for people, especially like myself, who was interested at that time in looking at 18th century and early modern materials. Suddenly, a treasure trove of materials became available here in my bunkered office in my basement. And so that was in many ways the research that I was able to do to accomplish this book. Um, and what that research revealed to me, I must say, I started out trying to uh, just sort of fact check a lot of the information that was the point of conflict in the 1619 debate. Uh, the marquee sort of facts that were being thrown around by both proponents and opponents of the 1619 project. I was interested in tracing them back to their original roots and really seeing how much weight they carried. But as I was doing that, I realized there was a much more interesting project. And the more interesting project was rereading a lot of the works of 18th century abolitionist activists and anti-slavery activists and reading it in a way that takes their words seriously. Because what I came to realize is that a lot of the material that's been written about early abolitionism, early anti-slavery, in both the English, British world and in what would become the American world, a lot of this material um, made some very weighty presumptions about what they were reading. Um, the presumptions such as that there were whole sections of letters and memoirs and pamphlets and books produced by this anti-slavery movement that uh, scholars would just simply presume were not intended as they were written. They presumed again and again that a lot of this material was written in a persuasive rhetoric. In other words, it was written and worded in the way it was to persuade others to join their movement, as opposed to being an actual, honest revealing of their own ideas, beliefs, and motivations. So in particular, there was a couple groups of ideas that I found heavily discounted. One of these ideas was when a lot of the early anti-slavery activists would write about all the advantages of getting rid of slavery. So they would write, for example, about how if you could get rid of slavery in America, it would encourage European immigrants to come. And that would improve the economy because obviously Europeans are more productive, they would say, than other folks. And they would make an economic argument that slavery should be abolished for economic reasons. And scholars would read these very common statements on the part of 18th century abolitionists. Excuse me. They would read them and they would say, aha, these very dedicated activists who want to lift up and provide benevolent relief to the suffering African American masses and Afro Caribbean masses. They're resorting to these arguments so as to persuade maybe even pro-slavery individuals to rethink the institution. In other words, they're being strategic. They're using their rhetoric strategically. But I thought, what if we just take them at their word? What if this actually is their concern? What if they are actually motivated not by a benevolence to relieve the sufferings of another people, but if they in fact are motivated by what they see as their individual and community self-interest, a community defined by race and class? When you start reading this material in that way, it suddenly opens up a whole nother possibility. And that's that a great bulk, it'd be dangerous, I think, to say all of it, but a great bulk of the white anti-slavery movement of the 1600s and 1700s was fundamentally self-interested, not benevolently interested, not motivated by morality as we understand it, but motivated by an understanding that the future society that they hope to build as settler colonialists in North America is incompatible with the institution of slavery because slavery fundamentally brings a population that they do not see as part of their future. Now, I have to also mention a second element that's often skipped over by scholars, and that is that it's very, very common in the 1600s and 1700s for abolitionists, white abolitionists, to talk about how important it is to eliminate slavery and end slavery because God's law is incompatible with slavery. That if you read the Bible correctly, there are plenty of passages where God indicates that he has a very skeptical, if not antithetical view of human freedom than slavery and is opposed to slavery. And in fact, orders as part of his ordering of the world that slavery should be opposed. Of course, the whole book of Exodus is nothing but a metaphor of the evils of slavery. And there are many other passages, of course, and 1600s and 1700s abolitionists would frequently invoke God in particular ways to try and carry their arguments. For example, the very first abolitionist expression in print in North America from a group of Quakers outside of Philadelphia in the early 1700s, published essentially a handbill, a manifesto, a statement of principles. And in that statement of principles, they said slavery is antithetical to God's law. And if we do not distance ourselves from it, if we do not eliminate this evil institution, God will smite us. God will punish us. God will ensure that our future is very bleak. This type of expression has a technical theological term. It's called providentialism. And providentialism is a very common way of thinking about divinity and the ultimate nature of reality in early modern times. It was not restricted just to any particular sect of Protestantism. It was very common, not only in Christianity, by the way, but it's a very common way of thinking about deity or deities in a world that was enchanted and a world that was unsecularized, if you will. Now, what if we take those expressions seriously? Instead of thinking of them as being rhetorical tactics to try and persuade an audience, what if they are the sincere fears of these groups of people? They sincerely fear the retribution of God, either in this world or the next, if things don't change. When we take those expressions seriously, we begin to understand that this is also a self-interested idea. In other words, you're opposing slavery because you fear God and you fear the consequences, not because you have any benevolent moral feelings towards the group that's being oppressed. Again and again, when I read these early modern documents in this way, the conclusion always came back. There's a very strong, if not predominant, self-interested streak in all of this activism, in this white activism. Now, I should also admit that I'm not the first to recognize this. I think the actual originator of this means of interpreting early abolitionism is none other but the great W.E.B. Du Bois, who in his very first publication, which was an extrapolation from his doctoral dissertation, which he published as The Suppression of the African Slave Trade in the 19th century, Du Bois concluded, quote, that a fear of insurrections and acts of violence and a condition of vague dread and unrest was the prime motive back of all the earlier efforts to check the importation of slaves. Now, Du Bois here is just talking about the transatlantic trade in slavery, in slaves. That was probably the earliest example of any white opposition to slavery at all. There was the first organized opposition to any aspect of slavery was to the slave trade. And Du Bois is calling our attention to the fact that opposing the slave trade can be very self-interested. Let's just take the most obvious point. If you don't want to live in a community that's multicultural and multiracial, then you don't want to have the slave trade, because the slave trade does one thing and one thing very well. It increases the population and the proportion of African people in your community. It is the conveyor belt, the transmission line, the way in which the population is augmented. And so Du Bois was on this same path in many ways in some of his early writings. And I just sort of took that idea and ran with it, if you will. And everywhere I turned, self-interest seemed to have been the guiding impression of a lot of these activists. Now, I could name a lot of the great and famous names of this time. Individuals like Anthony Benezet, who is often lauded as one of the greatest 18th century abolitionists and one of the grandfathers of the abolitionist movement. Benezet not only used all of these arguments to great effect, but in his own letters, private letters to other individuals discussing slavery and abolition, would freely admit that his foremost consideration was for the community of white folks and not for the enslaved. Let me just take a moment and just quote one letter that I found extremely revealing. And this is from 1771, so it's very much at the peak of Benezet's crusade against slavery. He wrote to a friend, I am like-minded with thee with respect to the difficulty and danger which would attend a sudden manumission of those Negroes in the southern colonies, as well as to themselves, as well as to the whites. Wherefore, except in particular cases, the obtaining of their freedom, and indeed the freedom of many even amongst us, is by no means the object of my concern, but the using the best endeavors in our power to draw the notice of the government upon the grievous iniquity and great danger attendant on a further prosecution of the slave trade. He says, it's by no means the main object of my concern. Manumitting, ending slavery, freeing those in bondage is not by no means the object of my concern. No, the main object of his concern was ending the slave trade, because the slave trade is what increased the numbers of people that he didn't want in the republic, the future republic. And my book is full of quotes like that from Benezet, from John Wesley, from John Fox, from John Woolman, on and on. And then we get to the U.S. founders, who were the subject of the controversy in the first place. And again, to follow my same guiding principle is we should take their words at face value. And this is another problem, I think, because a lot of the so-called founding fathers said many things critical and antithetical to slavery. And again, we tend to look at them as hypocrites. We tend to look at them as insincere. We tend to look at them as playing to the audience, perhaps, being strategic, being political. But what if we try and understand them? How could it be simultaneously true that they oppose slavery, but do very little about it? How could it be true that they be opposed to slavery, but very clearly focused on building what would essentially be a white supremacist nation? How can those things all be true at the same time? Well, as it turns out, that's all very consistent with the way earlier and more famous actual abolitionists thought about the world. They too wanted to end slavery, but to do so for their own purposes. Ultimately, where all this leads, of course, is the founding of a white supremacist republic that is structurally and institutionally designed so as both to keep enslaved people in custody, if you will, and also to ensure that if there is a day of freedom, of liberation, that the communities of previously enslaved individuals would not be able to enjoy the political power and the rights attendant with citizenship in the United States. And the ultimate form of this, of course, is banishment, is the organized removal of masses of people from the republic so as to maintain its character as a white republic. And virtually every one of who we would call the founding fathers gave support and dreamed of such movements in operation. So I think the bottom line, what I've taken from this project is that there is a way for us to think of all of these individuals and think of these events consistently, and not have to rely on dodges and detours and workarounds, like calling people hypocrites or thinking they're being insincere or saying that their rhetoric is strategic and tactical and not an expression of their actual minds. All we have to do is take their words seriously, look at them completely, and be able to accept the picture that emerges, a picture that I think for many people is far too troubling to actually contemplate. So there you have it. I'm open for questions.
Well, thank you so much for challenging our thinking about the past. One
Thank you.
question I wanted to ask to begin is there were white abolitionists and black abolitionists. What was the difference between the two and how did they work together?
Well, the difference couldn't be more stark. right? I mean, because Black abolitionists clearly prioritized and centered the liberation of enslaved people. They had very little concern for for structuring and supporting and furthering the project of a white supremacist country. They had no confusion about the purpose of abolition, and that purpose was moral, it was spiritual, and it was to the benefit of their community. Um, so the difference couldn't be more stark. And we can see that as well in the relationship between Black activists, Black abolitionists, and many of the leaders of what became the first white abolitionist movements, the Pennsylvania Abolition Society, the New York Manumission Society, these sorts of organizations, and their Black allies, because each of them had Black allies, really occupied a very uneven, unequal, and tense relationship with each other. It was very quickly Black activists in Pennsylvania and New York and other places realized that they had a very difficult line to walk. They had to support these organizations because there's no one else on the scene that they can rely upon as allies, and they need allies in this situation. They are marginalized. They are largely politically powerless. So white allies are very, very important, especially when many of them have great political power, great wealth, great property. We're talking about individuals like John Jay in New York, Benjamin Franklin in Pennsylvania. They knew they could not really oppose their white allies, but at the same time, they tried to keep a critical and important distinction between themselves and their allies. And we see this in numerous ways. But ultimately, the relationship was unequal. The white abolitionist movement had all the cards, had all the power, and they used many of them to manipulate and suppress dissenting voices in the Black community. They used many of their cards to try and create, even in free communities, as in Pennsylvania, free Black communities, to use their manumission credentials in ways to confine and repress and dictate exactly what tactics or what goals the Black community could demand. So yeah, it's a very rough relationship. Eventually, I think I do want to say there's a huge difference to be drawn between the early abolitionist movement, which is what I focused upon in this book, and the later what's
Yes.
referred to as the more radical abolitionist movement. I think that term is misplaced. It wasn't necessarily more radical, it was more Black. What happens, of course, is that a new generation of white abolitionists come of age, and that generation, led by Garrison and others, was willing, to a far greater extent than white allies in the 18th century, to allow Black voices to be heard and to speak their minds and to speak for their community. And that was, if that's radical, I mean, it is radical given the context of the time, but it doesn't necessarily speak to radical politics necessarily. It speaks to a radical reorientation of power in this movement. And I think we make a mistake simply calling that radical in terms of what is being demanded, because there's still a lot of the white abolitionist movement involved with the quote unquote radical abolitionists who still fundamentally are motivated by their own racial self-interest. And of course, this generation defines the world racially, and they are primarily motivated by trying to sustain and preserve and even realize the utopia of a white republic. And abolishing slavery just happens to be one stepping stone in that direction.
I know your work mainly focuses on the 18th century. But on the point about allies, I wanted to just get your view of the 19th century. The American Colonization Society
Hmm.
was a major effort, but that was actively opposed by the Black community. So there was a split in that point about needing allies.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, and there was a split within the split because the Black community in many places had had conflicted ideas about this idea of colonization. Um, there were some who said there's no hope for us in this country. We don't hold any cards here, and things are not going to really get better. So maybe Africa or Latin America or someplace uh, is an option. So that there was a split within the split as well, and I think that was never really resolved either. There's always been that counter tendency within the Black activist community of the 19th century. In many ways, actually, I would say that the 19th century Black activist community was far more diverse intellectually and ideologically than the white abolitionist community, which really just falls into two groups. I mean, it really just falls into immediatist and gradual. And they didn't think much beyond those terms, frankly.
I want to encourage everyone to raise your hand or use the React uh, way of wanting to raise your question. So, who would like to ask a question? Kate, what's your question?
Thank you, because I was having a hard time finding the raise hand button. Um, can you go back to those early people and explain what you see as the difference between the Adams presidents and the other early presidents, including thinking about the role in the Amistad trials?
Hmm. Well, the this is a really interesting point because let's take a wider view of John Quincy Adams' involvement in the Amistad trial. Um, let's think about what this is really about. It's really about trying to end the transatlantic movement of people from Africa to America. I mean, the reason that you would want to defend the mutineers of the Amistad is because you would like to set a precedent that would make it much more costly and difficult to sustain this horrific trade in individuals. But one of the reasons it's horrific to people like John Quincy Adams is that it's darkening his beloved state of Massachusetts by bringing more people all the time. And so there was probably the greatest consensus among white folks in the 18th and early 19th century that the slave trade must be ended. And they don't often say it out loud, but it doesn't take a great leap of presumption to see that this enthusiasm for ending the slave trade is tied directly to their racism and white supremacy. Uh, we can see that over and over again. After all, what is the only actual anti-slavery provision put in the Constitution? That is giving Congress permission in 20 years, not right away, but in 20 years, Congress may end the transatlantic slave trade. That's the only one. That's the only glimmer of hope for abolition in the Constitution. And it's no wonder that it focuses on the trade in human beings because they want this trafficking to stop. Even your absolute most knuckle dragging, mouth breathing, vicious racist in the country can be a very devoted anti-slave trade activist for obvious reasons.
I think one of the interesting points is that in 1790, the first census, 20% of the US population was Black.
That's
So
right.
your point is well taken. Carol and then Beverly.
Hi, good evening. Great information. I've been watching the American Revolution.
Hmm.
So, from the revolution, from the very beginning, when they had the first Congressional Congress,
Mm-hmm.
they thought about enslavement, but decided to push it down the road.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think from the very beginning, they built the country for white males. They didn't
Mm-hmm.
consider women, Indians, enslaved. But from it just went down here from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol.
Beverly?
Thank you. Had to get it muted. I'd like to know, why is it that we were not considered or ever addressed as the Africans, or the Africans constantly only as slaves? Slaves. It just hurts my heart every time I hear the word slave, instead of addressing us as an African, the Africans, the slaves, the slaves. My heart just takes a drop, and why did they do that? I mean, I know the answer, but I want to hear it. Why they take our identity and address us? It has made it so today that we American Africans do not want to address. We have people still that we just call ourselves black.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to address ourselves as having an ethnicity. We don't consider ourselves as Africans. They took all that away from us. So why?
Well, I think you did a very good job answering your own question. I think, of course, there's a large dose of prejudice there. It's a large dose of trying to essentially blame Black folks for slavery by saying that slavery is somehow part of their nature. I mean, if you attach a name to an individual, you're essentially saying this is part of your nature. This is part of something that is you, that is your identity. And so I think the use of slave as a term to describe an individual or a community is one intended, I think, to both demean and to shift blame onto those individuals. And I agree. It's something that I wish more writers and scholars would studiously avoid. I see still a lot of secondary history textbooks that will refer to slaves as opposed to enslaved people, which at least does the work of distancing the individual from the institution. But I think we have a long way to go. I mean, of course, I'm essentially preaching wokeness here, right? This is so far out of the mainstream right now.
Has gotten a little better by be called enslaved,
Yes,
but we're still denying our Africanness.
absolutely. That's
Yes.
true. Yes.
Tim, in the current environment, where history now is very much being discussed, like you say, the 1619 Project, and certainly what the current presidential administration is doing relative to the Smithsonian and the National Park Service, and et cetera. How does your work reflect on that current crisis we have in understanding American history, your contrariness?
Well, it gives me a lot to write about. Yeah, I mean, I think anybody who's a scholar these days, at least a scholar in the humanities, especially historians, have an obligation to essentially wear another hat as well as scholar, and that's the hat of being uh, a public, outspoken public person against these malicious myths and lies, if you will. I mean, we need more of individuals who actually are professionals in ferreting out information and stockpiling facts to push back and to say this political movement to erase history has no bearing in reality, has no bearing in the way things actually were. I wish more people would do that. I realize, I it's easy for me to say to do that because I'm tenured, I'm a full professor, and I have a union. And I know a lot of my colleagues don't have all three of those three things. So, but nonetheless, I think those of us with any ability to do so have an obligation to try and redress these myths. And yeah, there's only so many hours in the day and so many myths to fight, but pick one.
Evelyn, what's your question?
Well, I wanted to actually just comment on what Carol had said about, to me, and I am not a scholar, but by calling Africans who were brought over here Africans, that gave them the same level as Europeans or Frenchmen or Germans or English. But by calling them slaves, that's a subcategory. They don't get, nobody cares where they came from if you just call them slaves.
Well, it's an interesting question, the history of this identification with Africa, because, see, in the 19th century, the American Colonization Society was trying to expel people and force them to go back to Africa. Whereas some people were saying, we're now 2 and 3, 4 generations in this country, and we're no longer Africans, we're Americans. And so there's, over history, with the Garvey influence, and even today, there's a reconnection to Africa. So it's not just one story. There are a lot of reasons why people identify with Africa, and there are a lot of reasons why people don't identify with Africa. But that's back to what Tim was saying. The Black community is very complex, and there are lots of different points of view. But one of the interesting things about this many different points of view is that if you take a moment like the Civil War, people who were Pan-Africanists, like Martin Delany, people who were like not willing to go along with John Brown, like Frederick Douglass, everybody supported the Civil War to end slavery. So there's a convergence of all points of view. And it might, in fact, help us to understand the moment we're in today, that today the attack on the Black community is so severe that all points of view have to unite. I might even be talking about the midterms, but that's another question. Jane, what's your question?
I'm sorry. That was just, I didn't have a question.
We'll make one up.
No, I already had a comment about the enslaved, being careful to address or signify as enslaved people, not slaves, but enslaved.
Yeah.
And then freedom seekers instead of runaway slaves.
Fugitives, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Celia, what's your question? You're on mute. You're on mute. Type it in the chat.
Yeah. Well, I had typed it in the chat. Sorry about that. No, I just wanted to, I feel like I had a really good education, public education.
Everybody should put yourself on mute unless you're talking. Go ahead, Celia.
I was just saying, I feel like I had a really good public education and with a lot of history and civics. And it just seems to me that, and I'm 62 years old, but it seems to me that a lot of Americans seem just truly ignorant of all of our history, not just African American history, but just our history and our civics. Is it just me? Or, I was considered as a professor, you meet younger people, maybe you guys know, and maybe it's just one of my biases. I don't know. So thank you.
What do you think about that, Tim?
Oh, it's a real mixed bag. I mean, I'm always impressed sometimes at the incredible depth of knowledge of my students, but then I often find that depth of knowledge is like a pothole in the road that goes down a mile. It's very localized. And I think this is a consequence of the fact that we now have a generation of young people who have literally all the world's libraries and all the world's knowledge at their thumb tips. They have more resources at their command than any generation has ever had. They have more information. and they're not completely ignorant of how to use it. I mean, they are able to rally the information they need for particular purposes. Now, does that lead to a broad liberal understanding of the world? No, not necessarily. But it gives me hope, though. I mean, that I would say that when challenged, when pushed to come up with an idea or an answer, they are often surprising in the ways that they're able to come up with something and organize an answer. Um, as for our educational system, uh, you know, people have been complaining about public education for about 200 years. So there's nothing new under the sun there. No one has ever said we have the greatest public education system and it produces nothing but intelligent, enlightened, and knowledgeable people. That's never occurred. Um, it's always been rife with problems, and of course we have problems now too. And I think increasingly one of our biggest problems is that textbook publishers are pressured to include more and more patriotic myths and feel-good myths and exclude, information that is awkward and creates tension with students. And then teachers are under tremendous pressure not to cover certain subjects that are seen as, woke, if you will. And that is only increasing currently. I mean, we're going to change the whole political climate to get that turned around. And right now we are producing a generation of students. I can say from firsthand knowledge. I'm teaching a summer class right now, and every day I assign articles that should be common knowledge, and more than half the class says, "This blew my mind. I had no idea." Now, on one level, it's kind of gratifying to be able to present that information to people and say, "Here, read this. You might get a different understanding of things. Let's talk about it." But on the other hand, it makes me sad about the state of public knowledge, which I think is declining for all those reasons.
Let me call on Claude
Thank you.
Barnes.
Is it all right? I have another comment.
Just a second, Beverly.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Claude.
Yeah, I would just remind people that public education has a mission, and that's to miseducate people. Our textbooks, when I was growing up, it mentioned slavery in a paragraph, right? And when it was mentioned, it was like, okay, and you already know this probably, but the masters were good to the slaves. They were civilizing them. So this is all miseducation and lies agreed upon by people who write these textbooks and publish these textbooks. And that's, I think, part of the problem why we have people who are not that critical or get bamboozled, if you will, by the current people in charge because they feel like some of the complaints being raised are not valid. We are the greatest country in the world, and you should not be criticizing our history of patriotism, etc. And some of the points that the author made, I mean, people just don't know about the contradictions in the abolitionist movement. That's just not uh, um, widespread knowledge. But I'm glad to see that this book is published, and I'm hopeful that more people will pick it up and buy it. Maybe it become a bestseller. We'll see.
Okay,
Thank you,
Beverly,
Claude.
and then Kate. Beverly?
Yes, thank you. I want to mention this as well. Something that I've been pondering over for a very long time and thinking about it. I've coined it, instead of calling myself an African American, I've started calling myself an American African, and I think that kind of explains it a little better than an African American. We're American Africans, and once it's said that you're an American African, it explains it all. It explains the division of our blood being mixed and tainted with the in with the gene with the our race being changed by the sexual uh attacks on our women, and therefore we are half and half, and so that's kind of like overlooked or ignored. However, American African kind of explains whatever shade of color you are, and especially if you're coffee with a lot of cream, it explains that we are American Africans. And
Okay.
I was reading something about 3 months ago, and I came across something where Toni Morrison had made the same statement, and I didn't know that. She says she thinks the same thing, that we should be American Africans. So I want everybody to
Okay.
kind of get on the bandwagon and think about it and perhaps changing.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's all.
Kate?
Yeah, this picture that you're drawing from history is very interesting to compare to the modern population, which Texas is, I just looked this up. Texas is 40% non-Hispanic white. California is 30 something percent non-Hispanic white. So the country as a whole is browning and blackening. And that seems to be on a collision course with this persistent storytelling, myth telling, that you've drawn us back, you've drawn the roots back to the 1700s. So you may have said it before, but given all this, what do you think are the biggest implications or takeaways, or so what do we do now about what you found in your book?
Yeah, what is to be done? That's always the question. uh, well, it's really dangerous for a historian to try and be a futurist. They're almost terribly wrong. Um, but I think for myself, I've been thinking a lot lately about the need to try and embrace some of the founding values that we're losing, and that have never really been fulfilled. I'm thinking in particular of the value of democracy, for example. I mean, one of the reasons why, of course, we've never really had democracy. We never really had one person, one vote. We've always had a gerrymandered, money corrupted system of elite veto and property veto of democracy. We've never really had a moment of true democracy. But these are the kind of things, very simple ideas that I think we need to highlight more and more, because they give people hope. They give people an ability to start imagining a better future, right? And we have to find ways of firing people's imaginations, thinking about a different way of living and a different life. And so I think there's a revolution to be had in terms of the revolution of dreaming. And I think we've, to a large extent so far in the 21st century, we've kind of lost our ability to dream. The future seems so grim and so threatened in many ways that we don't spend a lot of time thinking about how things can be better and dreaming pathways between here and there. That's what I'd like to see more of, I think. I think that's one way to get people involved, and it has to be greater than just getting Tweedledee rather than Tweedledum in office in this fall. It's got to be greater than that. It's got to be something that makes people want to be part of, and to imagine a world that they currently don't live in. And I don't think we're doing enough of that work. I really don't. I mean, I think we need to do a lot more work on that.
I'd like to draw your attention to 1776. Because Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration said some things in the very beginning of that document that inspired African Americans
Mhm.
in the 17th and 18th centuries.
Mhm.
I mean, 18th and 19th centuries.
Mhm.
All men are created equal.
Mhm.
Written by a slave owner whose practice was in contradiction to that, but those words have inspired us so that recently, over 1,000 places in the United States, people gathered to read the Declaration out loud.
Mhm.
And it was not only the question of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and all people are created equal. It was also against the king in so many ways. So there's hope in that, even though we recognize Thomas Jefferson was like Epstein. He took a teenager. So, but anyway, there is some optimism in those documents as well.
Indeed, indeed. And I would say that I could imagine articles of impeachment today that carry fewer charges than those against King George.
Well, would you like, we're coming to an end. Would you like to make any final comments, Tim?
Oh, you've been a great group. I mean, your comments and questions are really got me thinking, and I really appreciate your time and your attention, and I hope we all keep working in this direction. So thank you very much.
Well, one of the things we try to do at the end, if everybody would take yourself off of mute, we're going to give Tim an applause, a Zoom applause. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
so
you very
much.
much.
Can't wait
Thank
to read your
you.
book.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Let's
very
make it a
much.
bestseller.
That's it.
Amen.
What's the name of your book? I missed it.
It's called
Patriots Dilemma,
Oh, very well. Yeah, thank you.
Pluto Press.
Thanks,
It's
Dr.
not a
Abdul.
thin book. It's a serious book.
Thank you. It's got footnotes and everything.
Yeah.
I'm gonna put up the slide for next week, just as a reminder
All
to
Yeah,
right.
good idea.
give everybody a chance to think about next month.
Fantastic. Well, again, thank you, Abdul. Thank you, Kate. Really appreciate it. Really enjoyed my time. So thank you. All right. Well, stay well.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.